think that like a decentralized AI is one of the biggest wins for Ethereum. Like we need decentralized infrastructure, we need decentralized tokens, like we need an ability to have an economy built in a decentralized way. And kind of crypto is critical for that. And I know that most people assume like when they hear crypto, they're just like either like monkey JPEG scammers or just like, a bunch of tech bros like gambling on, worthless things and playing gambling games. But reality is like beyond that, kind of the technology underlying these decentralized infrastructures, like we need market making mechanisms, we need the currency, like we need what functionality you can have on Ethereum in order to power ultimately the infrastructure that we're going to need to like break away and actually do something meaningfully different versus kind of what's come before. If we don't have a decentralized backbone with a token, that is ETH at the moment, like we can't have a decentralized compute market
Mm.
for AI. Like we can't have nice things.
And this is why we can't have nice things.
Yeah.
Hey everyone, this is Vinny here with the Defiant podcast, and today we're going to be talking to Patrick Amadon, who is an artist, a hacker, someone who has lots of experience in both the digital realm and in showcasing works for the public, in many cases to critical acclaim and public drama. So thank you so much for being here with us today.
Yeah, no, happy to be here. Thank you so much for having me. It's always good talking with you. I appreciate how opinionated you are about a lot of things.
Well, and crypto certainly does lend itself to big opinions. So why don't we start just introducing you to our audience? You describe yourself as a digital disobedient. I'd love to hear where this concept came from and why it vibes with you.
Sure. Well, I mean, you kind of look at like what got everybody into the space to begin with, right? I mean, everybody's kind of rejecting some element, whether it's kind of the financial structure, whether it's the gallery system, I mean, even a lot of people early to crypto are there because they found Silk Road. I mean, it's a interesting mix of people that kind of end up here. And for me, kind of digital activism, and kind of all its forms has always been something that's been really interesting and important to me. And I like the idea of seeing how far we can go in a good way, when it comes to what's possible in kind of a decentralized ecosystem that allows for a lot more expression than you kind of otherwise would have kind of across the board. So I mean, I like the idea of disobedience. I think a lot of the structures that are in place aren't built for us, whether that's IP, whether that's galleries, whether that's gatekeepers, finances. So I think that we have a really interesting opportunity right now to carve out something for ourselves. And I think if we do it in a thoughtful way that kind of tries to be as inclusive and accessible as possible, I think we can actually, kind of make a meaningful dent in how we engage each other broadly.
Yeah, I think a meme that's going around right now that I think is spot on is, on one side, it's like the system is broken and we need to fix it. And on the other side is the system is working exactly as it's meant to and needs to be destroyed. And I think blockchain comes into this conversation definitely on the latter side, right? Like disruption, yes, sometimes is a buzzword when it comes to the crypto space. But I think like, going back to the Genesis block of Bitcoin, like that is part of the genesis of the ideology within the crypto space. And so for you, why is it important to push against like social and cultural conformity?
I mean, kind of look where we got right now. I mean, like we can't even really tell kind of what's true anymore. And then you have kind of two
Mm.
sides, basically being trained to fight against each other. Like there's no centrism, there's no kind of objective search for truth. We both, regardless of what side you're on, you kind of exist in an echo chamber that seeks information that validates your pre-held opinions or invalidates the opinions of the other side. But we lack discourse. I feel like kind of across the West, we see democracy failing in so many different ways. And we see a lot of our freedoms under attack. And we have a lot of examples, even recently, of what is just a continual encroachment. A lot of these freedoms that we kind of established, kind of I guess that we take as our basic rights. We like refer to them in the West as kind of our inalienable rights. And I feel like they're a lot less inalienable than they might have been a few years ago. And you couple that with kind of where we are with technology in the world, and I think it's going to be a really critical period for the next 10 years before we hit AGI to really carve out what's important to us and make sure that we have protections in place, make sure that we have the discussions, make sure we have the debates that really establish kind of what we want in the world. Because AI is just a tool as much as people want to kind of anthropomorphize it and call it
Mm.
a collaborator. But it's a tool that's either going to do wonderful things for humanity, or it's a tool that is going to be used to oppress a lot of people. AI powered surveillance states is a terrifying thing. Especially when you have kind of the state of the US right now, where if you show up at a protest, they're throwing you into the back of vans and you happen to be undocumented, well, they might deport you because you showed up at a protest. I mean, fundamental freedoms of speech are under attack. And I'm sure we'll get into it later, but kind of Hong Kong's a very kind of cautionary tale for the West. And I feel like we haven't learned our lesson. The thing that resonated with me about that situation, and I think is very relevant to right now, is you have a group of people that protested the encroachment of an authoritarian regime.
Hmm.
You know, the protest was crushed. A few years later, they had the student protests. That protest was crushed. And the reason that we're not going to see more protests out of that area anymore is because fundamentally the right to privacy was eradicated. I mean, I couldn't communicate with you on any form, Signal, Telegram, or monitored at the network level.
Right.
I can't communicate with you via what WeChat or WhatsApp. I can't text you on Twitter. It's monitored, and if they see that we're talking about, hey, let's go protest, well, we're going to both go to jail. AI makes that a lot worse, and we've already seen how just the eradication of these freedoms results in basically the inability to protest, the inability to speak freely. And I don't think we're immune from that in the West. I think we're seeing kind of the rise of that here and now. So it's kind of a terrifying possibility that I don't think is really talked about. And I don't think that previous examples from other parts of the world are seen as relevant enough to us right now.
Even though we're like super global and like supposedly learning from history and the mistakes of others, I think this is a great time to talk about your piece in Hong Kong. So No Rioters is a really interesting piece. It opened up conversations about censorship and the dangers of exercising free speech in like an increasingly authoritarian, political landscape. And so this was featured live in person on a 70 by 20 meter LED screen in the Causeway Bay. So it got tons of visibility. I love the idea of people like just walking by and not even seeing it. And within the piece, we had names, ages, and sentences of convicted prisoners, protesters that people really only started noticing when they were taking a picture. And then it was like, wait a second, what is that frame that I captured, which is beautiful? How did the idea for that aspect of the piece come about? Like, really, as some articles have said, smuggling in this information into the piece.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I feel like art is only as good as its ability to kind of convey a message. And you have to look at kind of what's able to convey the message, right? If I put up a giant poster of Winnie the Pooh or something, and just mocked Xi Jinping, like it would be stopped by the billboard people and the censors immediately, and it would ultimately achieve nothing. So
Right.
I feel like the challenge is, how do you convey the message in a way that gets the message out there, right? Like it's how do you actually like get something out there that resonates with people, that actually delivers the message but also avoids the censors.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always I always like Fight Club, right? He splices in the scenes to the movies, and I was like, okay, that might work in a billboard. And sure enough, singing splicing in the text, every 10th frame or so, snuck right by the censors, and this thing played for 3 days, on the largest billboard in Hong Kong. And then the Hong Kong Free Press found out about it, so they wrote an article about it. And then the next day, kind of all hell broke loose. Kind of the major global Western press wrote about it, BBC and Financial Times and all these others. And the Chinese state media started writing about it as well, saying I was pro rioter and encouraging violence. And I'm absolutely pro rioter. Like I feel like whether that's in the US or abroad, I feel like generally like recently rioters have generally been on the side of the right.
Well, especially when it comes to like, people are pushing against government regulation or government choices that is like by and large bad for the public. So like in some cases is a riot the absolute right choice? Is outrage the right choice? I mean, I think all the time about how, when in France they raised the retirement age by like 1 year, they were burning cars in the streets. Like,
Yeah.
and I know people will say like that's silly, but I think it's like, well, we live in a world where like being effective and efficient and like putting work above all else is so important, which seems so psycho to me because like we're literally just an evolved monkey, we're supposed to be like spending time with loved ones, making art. Like this capitalist society that we're like forced to live in, kind of creates this situation where we're okay with the government taking time away from our retirement, taking time away from our, maternity and paternity leaves, like all these things that are like, this is not the point of being alive. So like we should, I think, express our opinions and our ability to fight back where possible. So it's weird. Like, and why would you be anti-free speech?
Well, I think you nailed it. You yeah, I feel like you're on the side of the destroy the system. But it's like, there's like the defiant, right? Like it's the people that recognize this and the people that know that this stuff is not built for them. Whether it's raising the retirement age by a year, like it's a kind of an assault on just common people for the enrichment of a select few.
Mm-hmm.
And, in so many ways, that's not going to stop unless people speak out, cause disruption. Obviously, like the bureaucracy has been heavily captured by these people. Like the traditional avenues that you're told to go down are ineffective.
Yes.
Should you keep pursuing them? Sure, but also realize like if something's not working, you have to either increase the intensity of what you're doing or change what you're doing. There's a lot of issues that we have broadly socially that, absent a fix through just kind of peaceful protest and everything else, I think requires like maybe something a little bit extra, and that's why I think it's just really important to advocate and be activist in the avenues that are available to us while we have those avenues available to us. Because, not all the paths that we have right now will be the paths that we have in the future. And I think it's
Right.
critical for us to fight for what we need and a fight for just, I feel like what is honestly just something that's so kind of basic and human and sadly just not available to most people.
Yeah, and I think like this is the part of the crypto industry that I get very excited about because there are people working on, how can if we're going to see data as an asset, how do we create a platform that allows for the individual to own the data and to therefore benefit from the data versus what's happening with, Facebook and TikTok where the only people benefiting from that are the shareholders
Mm-hmm.
of these companies, right? Even though it's our data that becomes the resource. And so, I mean, have you seen any legislation anywhere in the world about AI that like you feel has been positive or is in the right direction? Because so far, all I'm seeing is like very surface level stuff, mostly about how it's regulated as a business,
Yeah.
not as a technology.
Yeah, it's a really complicated situation. I think the EU actually kind of leads the way on ethical AI development, and I think ethical AI development's critical for all of this. But there's also just it's in again like the gray area is just not an area that we seem to be able to explore
Mm,
in this world. And I feel like for AI, the gray area is
everything.
we have to well we have to beat China to AGI. Um, like, will we be better stewards? Yes. Like, will we be great stewards? No. We have a ton of issues, but I would much rather the West have reached AGI before China because what we'll see the large socioeconomic shift technology has caused potentially in modern history.
Mm-hmm.
AGI is what's required to solve a lot of these intractable technological problems like nuclear fusion, cancer. So my concern is that were Beijing to get there first, what will happen is like they will solve major cancers. And then who's going to wait? Who's going to wait a year for the West to catch up? No, you're going to go to
Mm.
Beijing, get your treatment. So there's going to be a massive influx, a massive economic influx, whoever gets there first, in a way that's going to reshape kind of the global political order. Sadly, I won't be able to go. I still have an active arrest order, but everybody else will go. And the same thing with fusion and these other things. So we have to get there first. They have no guardrails around their development. So naturally, they will progress faster. So it's a matter of our collective will and resources and security focused on AI development that I think is kind of our only chance. And so, like, do we need ethical guardrails? Absolutely. But I just think it's really important to kind of bear in mind that whatever the power usage is, because I know that's a big one with AI,
Hmm.
projected to be 3% of global electricity usage. Yeah, it has a huge carbon footprint, but the cost of not winning the race will have a much bigger one. And I think that a lot of the technologies that we'll be able to finally achieve once we get there is going to offset whatever we spend to get there in immeasurable ways.
Well, especially if we add green energy to the initiative of one of the things that we can create, I think obviously blockchain gets the same kind of blame for the effects on the environment as well. And it's just strange to me that, at this day and age, we like aren't putting more effort into clean energy and how to make energy in and of itself a better resource versus just blaming whatever industries use it the most, which by the way, social media also on that list, but you don't see people like
Yeah.
like putting those two things together. So I'd love to talk a little bit about the concept generally of regulation, because there are plenty of people in both crypto and AI who they like that there's no regulation. Some people would even argue that the lack of regulation is one of the main drivers as to why we're able to develop so quickly, because we don't have to go through all of the qualifications and submitting for review. But what's your take on that? Do you think regulation is good for these industries, is going to hamper growth? What's your take?
I mean, in practice, well, I guess in theory, yeah, great, right? In theory, you have a benign entity coming down and saying, here's how we're going to prevent people from being scammed on so many ways,
Mm-hmm.
which has been a huge problem in crypto. Like, security has been
Huge, yeah.
a tremendous problem, and it's been a big black eye on adoption and everything else in the space. In addition to the countless people that have actually been hurt by it. In practice, I just feel like we just have such an issue with kind of bureaucratic capture. We have just so many people with vested interest influencing the regulation that in the regulation we would get in theory is very different than what we get in practice. In practice, I just feel like regulation ultimately results in just a bunch of people who had their hands with the legislatures getting preferential competitive edges and everything else. And I think it really ends up, the net total of it ends up hurting innovation and hurting just the regular people. Like, should we? Yes. Should we? No. I mean, we just aren't able to do it effectively. I mean, I do like it in theory, but in practice, I just think our system is ill-equipped to separate out the interests that try to guide things in their favor.
Well, and something I've been obsessed with since last week. So the House Democrats, basically voted down the stablecoin bill. So we're not going to have stablecoin regulation. And the main reason that I've seen in general reporting is that they were afraid that Trump would financially benefit from stablecoin regulation. I'm just like, you think stablecoins and the Trump meme coin are the same thing?
Yeah.
Like that is so weird to me, and like for them to not have the understanding of like what stablecoins are and how they could benefit. And then I also wonder like how much of this is, they see crypto as a threat to the US dollar, which it is, intentionally so, right? So I mean, do you have any hope for these regulators, these politicians to be able to like regulate anything? Because I feel like there's just a major gap in knowledge of the subject matter.
Yeah, I mean it's difficult, and I think everything we've seen so far has just come through kind of the mass adoption, the gradual and slow mass adoption of this, to the point it's just become undeniable and on a number of different levels. I just think the current administration has severely hampered our ability to come to consensus on this because the broad public is fine with this, is fine with this. If stablecoins were, quote, regulated, that would just facilitate kind of adoption of the greater financial system. And on so many different like financial settlement layers, it makes a ton of sense. It makes everything more efficient, which benefits everybody.
Right.
But, sadly, you've got the Trump coin, you've got Qatari jets, you've got such the appearance and practice of corruption that it really gives the whole thing such a black eye.
Yeah.
So really just like one person's kind of greed and selfishness around there, if they had just left it alone, we would be fine and we would be 2 steps ahead of where we are right now. But instead, you're just giving the other side so much ammo to just like attack the industry as a whole. And I
Yeah.
don't think it's really, I just don't think it's particularly, I don't think it's really like a balanced or accurate view to just say like all of this is corrupt. But a lot of these
Right.
narratives just feed into that. And like we said, like it's not about what's true, it's kind of about what story is most effective for your agenda. And I feel like so much of this like little stuff on the side, whether it's this dumb meme coin or whatever else, just gives the other side so much ammo to attack kind of everything, including, which is mostly legitimate stuff here. So it's sad to see that. I feel like if you're pro crypto, you would take a step back and not let your drama get in the way of advancing what is like a very healthy agenda for
Yeah,
making this all normalized.
precisely. No, you hit it on the head there.
The PR Genius is a top crypto PR and growth marketing agency, helping brands globally with expert PR and strategic growth marketing. They've worked with 300 plus projects like Movement Labs and IO.net. Unlike traditional agencies, they charge only on performance. Their services include earned PR opportunities and marketing services to help boost wallet holders and organic X followers. Learn more at www.theprgenius.com.
Let's talk about another artwork of yours. We'll bring it from Hong Kong back here to New York. So last August, your piece Passive Observer was live in Times Square, and it showcased kind of the role of the public in geopolitical events. And I think it comes at a very good time where, I do think like on purpose, we are being just berated with all of these different, executive orders and all these like multiple topics within the news that, there are too many big things for us to focus on, right? And so it's a human instinct. I think it's very natural to want to kind of turtle your way out and not pay attention, And so this piece, I think, is speaking a lot about that, and specifically how indifference from across the world can actually fuel violence. Like it's not as, safe and simple as you think. So how long did it take for someone to notice what this piece was really about?
It took a couple days. Same deal. People just taking photos. Um, it's exactly what you said. We're just so inundated with changing narratives and changing stories, and what's popular this week is not popular next week. It just dehumanizes so much. Just like looking what's happening in Ukraine right now. You look at the
Mm-hmm.
shift in the number of predominantly conservative people in the United States who view Ukraine as, complicit in the invasion or actually an issue. I mean,
It's insane.
Ukraine was invaded by our biggest geopolitical adversary in a war of aggression and territorial expansion, and it's something that we should be united against because Russia is the bad guy. And I don't know why that is so difficult to understand. But, like we've kind of devolved into this world where, again, it's not about the truth. It's about what stories you can tell to advance your agenda. For a lot of the conservative press, like if everybody agrees, there's nothing there, right? Like no one
Yeah,
cares
there's
if we
no
agree.
ratings.
Yeah, no one's coming back for the next show if like everybody just agreed and like, they're the bad guy. So there's just this counter program and this counter narrative to build these like false stories about Ukraine, build these false stories about Russia, controversies, and I don't know. And I think we just end up with these like really kind of trying to like keep the language PC. We just end up with these really terrible situations because we're media is not an objective viewpoint on the world. It's just all of these, how do we tell narratives that get people to come back for the next episode? Like, we are basically just watching a TV show. We're not listening to the news.
Yeah, we're in the Truman
And
Show.
yeah, and whether it's Gaza, whether it's Ukraine, whether it was Hong Kong, we just watch passively these situations unfold, not as a situation where real people are dealing with real hardships that most of us will never face. We're watching this as entertainment. Oh, it's them. There's this disconnect. They're other. They're not real. It's distant. We don't feel the 500,000 Ukrainian soldiers that are dead. We don't feel for the starvation that's happening in Gaza right now. We just look at it and sit back and say like, oh, wow, that's happening. Okay. And then the next news program will give us another reality TV show plot line. Like there's a disconnect. So that was really kind of the rationale for the piece. I wanted to put something up there that would just get people to stop for 1 second
Yeah.
and just consider the situation. And I just think that's I think that's an important role for digital art and an important role for art in the public discourse today. Because I don't think we communicate with text anymore. Like I don't think I go to you and say, hey, look at these facts, look at this opinion. This is researched by somebody, reputable. Like, you don't look at that and change your opinion. You come back with a different set of text, and we just keep talking at each other, and like nothing happens. Like, I feel like the pathways of art haven't been so convoluted and kind of diverted as kind of text and media has been. And I just feel like there's an interesting opportunity right now for artists to get work out there that actually does stir debate, does stir discussion, does get people to look at things in a critical manner, and get people to actually like consider, even if it's just for a moment, like what their position is and why they hold that position. Which I think there's very few things that can do that. And I don't know. That's kind of my pitch on why I think art really matters in the world today, especially.
I think it's an important conversation too in the context of, the National Endowment of the Arts is losing funding and now has to take that money away from magazines, artists, publishing houses, people who were specifically working with, marginalized individuals or who were having conversations like the one we're having now. I think it's very obvious that when you start wanting to control the narrative of how things are going, one of the first groups of people that you attack and defund is artists, like for exactly what you're saying, So I think more than ever, like this is one of those times where like people are going to look back and the art's going to be like, whoa.
Yeah. And I mean, to your point, right? I mean, like, for kind of authoritarian regimes, like the goal is to just homogenize the narrative. The goal is to eliminate anything that maybe is counter to what you want people to think. And a lot of these institutions, whether it's like a lot of it's around like Black history, a lot of it's around non-white American stories, history, and lore, is removing that from the narrative. We're going so far backwards if we can't have multiple viewpoints that maybe contradict each other and just have a discussion about it. Like, the need to actually remove those viewpoints from the thing is really kind of a step in the wrong direction. And I just think that like you said, like art is critical for that. And I just think too, like, silence is compliance as well. I feel like
yeah,
if you're in this position, if you have a platform and you're just kind of going along with it, like, I don't know. I feel like history probably shouldn't be too kind to you.
and that actually reminds me of another meme that I saw recently that was like, yeah, there's a word for like all of the people in Nazi Germany who like didn't stand up and say anything and didn't fight the Nazi regime, and that word is Nazi. Like, and I think there's been so much new media, movies, TV shows in the last few years, I'd say in the last 10 years, that are exploring these stories, like specifically from Nazi Germany. And I think that's the thing that like I'm seeing in conversations that Democrats are having right now where they're like trying to choose their battles because they don't feel like they have political capital to work on immigration and crypto and AI and the economy and the price of eggs, right? And so they're like picking their battles and it's like, okay, well, which one are you going to pick? Because time is going on and like also all of these things are interconnected, right? You can't talk about AI and crypto without talking about the economy or talking about energy or talking about like the culture at large, right? So it's interesting to me that, you know, there is a lot of just people not having these conversations. And like when it comes to like me talking to normies about Bitcoin, for example, like my intro is literally the US dollar is weakening. It's good to have another form of currency. It's good to have a currency that cannot be manipulated by the US government or other governments, right? Like, I think that's a very kind of cool way to open up conversations with people who aren't into crypto because they can feel the shock and the disturbance in the economic universe, right? Because you can't buy what you used to buy even a few months ago.
Yeah, no, it's real. And you know, that stuff, when you start talking about stuff that actually affects people in the real world, and I think that's when all this crypto stuff starts to make sense. You know,
Yeah.
like we just need more things in the hands of the people. I mean, we have whether it's bureaucracies, governments, corporations, everybody pushes to centralize their power and accumulate more of it. And decentralization is exactly the opposite of that. Decentralization is giving the power back to the people. And I think one of the big fights that we have right now for the next 10 years is the decentralization of AI versus the centralization of AI, right? AI,
Mm-hmm.
again, tool, powerful. We have the possibility of AI being basically controlled. If all the compute is run by AWS, well, guess what? AWS and Amazon just controls a vast majority of our future. If we can decentralize that compute across everybody's access compute on their desktop, well, all of a sudden we have something that's really powered by everybody and accessible to everybody. You know, one of the biggest failures is when, you know, we had the kind of the emergence of the internet is we rapidly allowed Google and Amazon, Microsoft to kind of centralize control over key verticals within the space. And we're still dealing with that today. 25 years later, we're finally seeing a couple very weak rulings come out that are stripping Chrome from Google, punishing Apple for, you know, service fees. I mean, we let a handful of corporations just dominate the center of critical technologies, and they, of course, maximize their profit, and the people suffered for that. And now we have AI, we have the chance to do this all over again, not only just from a wealth distribution standpoint, right? You saw how rapidly wealth consolidated to a handful of people in Silicon Valley.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so again, like accessibility to AI is critical. Distributing the compute, I think, is critical. Coming up with a better version of distribution than what we had with the emergence of the internet, I think is critical. And I think we have all of that is still on the table right now. You know, there's concerns about OpenAI. I think the release of, you know, the open source AI models is critical.
Mm.
But again, like we just really need the compute and the models to be open source and available to everybody. And this has to be sort of a technology that's kind of driven by the people. Otherwise, we're going to end up with just the same thing that we had the last time. It's just going to be a new set of faces.
Well, or the same old faces spending millions of dollars a year to look young. Another
Yeah.
dystopian option. But yeah, I think could you share with the audience like I think a lot of people have the feeling of AI is just writing my emails.
Hmm.
What's so bad about that? Like I think they don't really see what are the risks that come along with an Amazon or a Google or a Facebook being the main arbiter of AI.
Yeah. So there's a couple of things. I mean, you know, I think some of the more obvious ones are around kind of the AI surveillance state, right? You show up at a protest in New York City. There's a lot of cameras. There's a lot of facial recognition software, and you run that through AI. It's very simple to track who showed up at the protest, document their name and everything else. So if you become an undesirable, or you know, very presently, if you're undocumented, you showed up at a pro-Palestinian protest at Columbia. If with an AI system, it's very simple to say like you were there. Okay, now we're going to arrest you and deport you, right? Like AI, and then you talk about like, well, how do you go across everybody's emails, right?
Mm,
We have keyword searches right now. NSA uses a lot of that, but keyword searches and kind of the existing architecture doesn't capture content or context. Or it captures content, but it doesn't capture context. And
hmm.
so much of the context is actually the critical part of it. So they can get all the content, but there's a huge amount of manual labor that goes into getting the context of all of it, which results in a much less efficient scrape of what people are actually doing online. And with AI, well, you address that problem immediately. So your
Mm,
email communications, your encrypted communications, it's interesting. Like people think that Signal and Telegram are secure, but the reality is like the content of what you send on Signal is encrypted, which you can only get unlocked, with a court order, which is also
right.
possible. But on the network level, I can see that you sent me a text message at this time. I replied to you at this time. You are at this location. I'm at this location. With enough of that metadata, you can infer the context and the content very easily, and you can map out people's entire networks. Like we're just not in a place right now where we have any real digital security or digital privacy, and a lack of digital privacy paired with an AI apparatus that nobody's ready for, I think has the potential to be really abused by a lot of either state level actors or larger companies. So when you talk about Amazon controlling all of the compute, controlling all the compute means that like every time you ask a question, you go through the Amazon servers. Well, they're going to be scraping all of that data. If you
Right.
ask about like, hey, how do I help my grandmother avoid being deported? And that's going to a centralized server, well, guess what? That information could actually very easily be kicked over to ICE. And they're like, oh, wait, we missed that person.
Time to go get
You know,
Granny.
yeah. So there's just a lot of stuff that comes with centralized. And in addition to just like the more central control, the higher the prices typically get, the more exclusive it typically gets, the more extractive it gets. Decentralized solutions and it's just more competition. It's more for the people. Like we get better, faster solutions. Open source software develops much faster than closed source software and is far less extractive. And for a technology as transformative as AI, if we're not embracing a decentralized solution that is more of the people, I think that we're not only going to miss out on a ton of innovation and a ton of progress, we're more likely to lose the race with China to AGI. And we're
Hmm.
more likely to end up in another situation where we are just paying a handful of very entrenched companies for access to something that fundamentally should be available to everybody.
And it's like the classic problem too of like how many tax dollars have funded this research? How many articles, blog posts, Instagram captions, like it's already trained on and paid for in large part by the taxpayers who are then going to be taken advantage of using that technology. I mean, that's not a concept that's new,
Yeah.
unfortunately, but it does create a strange kind of loophole here where it's like, wait, shouldn't this already be something that we're talking about? Like the public's ownership of this type of technology. And especially the more and more that we see AI, transforming jobs and taking certain jobs away. Like, I think it is part of the conversation too of like, how do we shift those gains then to the public as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned like taking jobs away. It will take a lot of jobs away, and it's going to take a lot of jobs away that were previously safe. I mean, but it is a bit ironic that so many of the people that were in the camp of like, well, if your manufacturing job got outsourced, you should have gone to college, are now at risk of having their jobs outsourced to AI.
Mm-hmm.
Irony, irony. It is going to disrupt. It is going to disrupt a lot of people who are not used to being disrupted. It's going to disrupt a lot of professions. It's a tool. It's going to make people more efficient. But we've opened Pandora's box, right? And
Yeah.
it's not going back. And I just feel like the faster you can just accept that we have a very new world coming and learn the technology, learn how it can help you, learn how, learn if you have a good shot of sticking around with your current job or if you need to start pivoting now. Like
Right.
it's, you just really need to have a better understanding of like kind of where this is all going so you can adapt with it well. I mean, we're talking about like adapting to AI taking your job. Again, like we have people in Gaza and Ukraine, like trying to dodge bombs. I mean, there's a scale of adapting to situations. This is like light compared
Yeah.
to what it could be. So I think we can keep the complaints to a minimum, but um, you just have to adapt. Like it's going to happen. And it's also interesting, like with when the internet came out, like you either knew or you knew you didn't know, right? Like you either knew how to access the website, you either knew what an IP address was, or you didn't. With AI, I think a lot of people think they understand AI because they can put a prompt in GPT and get an answer. And the
Right.
reality is like how LLM models work, how tokens work, how the compute works. I think we'll start getting a lot more into prompt automation and, other more kind of advanced features. But like, I feel like understanding this is it's a little bit trickier for people to know how much they don't know than it may have been before technology. And I just think it's really important to just ask maybe like, do I need to learn a little bit more about this? Because I feel like there's a very low bar that a lot of people cross with AI right now. And I don't think
Mm-hmm.
that's sufficient. I think a lot of those people will be in a lot of trouble if they don't take that extra step and learn just a little bit more about how this works.
Get 20% APY on ETH with the High Growth Vault by Kelp in one click. High Gain uses blue chip DeFi strategies with restaked ETH across Aave, Pendle, Usual, and Elixir, managed by strategy pros Ultra Yield and Upshift to deliver highest rewards on ETH, all in just one click. Deposit your ETH, receive High Gain ETH, and stay liquid in DeFi. Trade or use High Gain ETH on platforms like Pendle and Balancer while still stacking rewards. Follow along these steps to get started.
When I think of the early internet, I think of MySpace, right? And that was like a bunch of tweens and teens learning HTML code so that they could design their page. Like I think the internet actually came in with this kind of there was a definite value add if you were a young person wanting to learn how to use it under the hood, right? Not just going to the websites. And do you see any of that happening with AI? Like any kind of, people going under the hood to train their own AI? Is that like accessible in the same way or?
Absolutely. And that's the remarkable thing about it is like I've seen so many people get into coding
Mm,
because AI can help you code. I've seen so many people get into so many different specific interests or hobbies because you have this kind of infinitely powerful, teacher or educator or collaborator kind of next to you as a tool.
yeah.
But I just think I think that just digging into that and kind of getting a feel for it, like you said with MySpace, like after you played around with HTML on MySpace, you're like, you knew a little bit more about how the internet worked, right? And I feel like for a lot of people, even that little bit of extra knowledge helped them see and adapt to changes and trends in a way that maybe their peers might not have been able to. Um,
Mm-hmm.
my hope is that because AI is still broadly accessible to people, that we'll see a lot of people from a lot of different places that may not have otherwise had access to kind of the initial riches of, say, like the internet culture in Silicon Valley, be able to be early adopters and find their place and find, a reward for, being early to AI, learning how to code, learning how to train your models, learning just like understanding the ecosystem, because again, like we're all just kind of barraged with choices every single
Mm-hmm.
day about like what to do and how to react to all of this. And, the more you know about it, the higher quality decisions you're going to make. And over a long enough time period, like it's inevitable that the people who know more will be farther ahead just because, they're going to be right more often than the other people.
Right. And like understanding, the culture of it and the ecosystem. Like I'm part of a poetry community here in New York, and we got into a little bit of debate recently about AI art. And it's one of those difficult topics with normies, right? Because they hear AI art and they envision someone typing a prompt that's like 5 words. Like they
Mhm.
envision the laziest possible version of AI informed artworks. And here I am on the other side where I'm like, well, let's talk about GANs. Let's talk about the people who are like pushing against the prompts and like going in Photoshop and like combining all these things together. Like there are interesting things people are doing with AI in regard to art. It's just if you don't understand the complexity of AI, then of course the art is going to be too far gone for you. You're not going to know like what is interesting that these people are doing. And in fact, seeing AI art as something that's, again, taking jobs away from artists, taking income away from artists, when in fact, I mean, I can think of 10 artists right now making money off of AI art and the weird, unique things that you can only conceptualize with AI.
Yeah,
So,
and that's exactly it. I mean, there's some really interesting stuff that empowers a lot of people. Like, do I think you need to have spent 8 years, at Cal Arts and then studying drawing to be a good, illustrator? Like, no, that feels like a needless technical barrier to be able to execute a vision that you have. And if AI makes it simpler for people with a creative vision to execute their vision, I think that just benefits everybody.
yeah.
I think a lot of these barriers we don't really think about as barriers, but like if you need to spend a decade coding, that's a barrier to coding. If you need to again go to if you need to like study like creative writing in school and get a master's in it in order to be like able to be a poet, that's a huge barrier to just being a poet. Like people either have vision or they don't. And I feel like just lowering the barrier for people to execute on a creative vision is a tremendous like technological advancement. And I'm here for that. And again, like
Mm-hmm.
it's just I feel like a lot of it's like just again like understanding the technology. You have the two people who look at an identical poster of I think it was Dune,
Mm-hmm.
right? And they're like it clearly copied the poster because they look very similar. But if you understood how it worked, there's thousands of Dune fan art and posters and everything else, which trained a model so well the model was able to then recreate the thing that looks like the original thing. To the layperson, you're like, it just copied it. But if you know how it works, you're like, oh, it went through this whole training process, iterative loops, optimizations, everything, and it arrived at something that looks very similar. And if you don't understand the basics of how this all works, I feel like you're going to be at a really bad spot down the road.
Yeah.
And a huge thing is like it's most of the issues aren't with AI. Most of the issues are with having created these centralized points of pain for all of us, right? Take Netflix, for example, right? Netflix, in 2 years, when the writers' contract is up and they're going to inevitably go for probably the most epic strike of all time, they agreed basically on a 3-year ceasefire on AI. There's no AI allowed in the writers' room,
Mm.
right? Because the
Wow.
writers wanted to preserve their jobs. The studios knew it was coming. They fought about it for a while and they decided on basically a ceasefire. When that ceasefire's up, AI will be allowed in the writers' room. And it's not AI that's the issue here. The issue here is that you basically have centralized so much of the production into a handful of companies, whether it's like Warner or Netflix. And those companies then, they're not going to pass all of the savings and production cost on to new properties. They're not going to say like, oh, these 10 writers we don't need anymore. Let's assign them to a new project. They're just going to make
Right.
more profit, give the profit back to the shareholders, and a lot of people will be out of a job. But that's our kind of collective fault for having not had the foresight to understand what's happening with decentralization, allowing these companies to kind of capture the politicians and the legislatures to create laws that have helped, increase their control over the industry.
Mm-hmm.
So again, like the people that are most at risk for losing their jobs are the people that should really be the strongest champions for a decentralized version of AI, getting the compute in the hands of the people away from the Amazons and pushing for independent content creation in a model that can exist outside of these centralized entities. Because, at the end of the day, like you got to build the thing that you want. Otherwise, you're just going to be building the thing that you're hired to build, like,
Good point.
so yeah. So with this thing, so anyway, LA is going to be chaos in 2 years, but I just think it's more an example of like the consequences of centralization, less so the consequences of AI. But I think for a lot of people, it's much easier to just blame AI, which is
Of
a huge
course.
which is a huge misfire. Like you're blaming the thing that's not responsible for your situation. Your situation will only get worse if you are not assessing it accurately.
Yeah, that's like millennials now are getting attacked for killing the restaurant biz, and it's like, okay, well, let's blame the forks. That's why no one's like, no,
Yeah.
it's the business model. It's the amount of money that we have in our pockets to spend, and it's like it's so easy to just go down to the tool. And I think too, like a lot of normies have issues with the idea of decentralization. I was talking to somebody last week who just said, the biggest problem with decentralization is there's no one person who is the face of the brand, who, when things are going crazy, that person goes out and calms the public, or who takes responsibility for things. What do you think of that concept? Like, is not having a figurehead bad, or is it actually a strength?
I mean, I think it's a strength. I mean, because I feel like what figureheads basically allow other people to tell narratives in a way that benefits them. It's harder to do that when you're kind of like firing blanks into like, a large decentralized ecosystem. But at the same time, right, like those narratives aren't necessarily helping. Look where we are right now, right? Like, yeah, Uber Eats is taking 30-40% of like all the orders that would have gone to the restaurant. Now the restaurants are all struggling to survive because we've allowed like these delivery companies to achieve like dominance, and they just keep expanding until people break.
Right.
Like we just again, like you just Ethereum is kind of critical because we need a decentralized cryptocurrency to power a decentralized infrastructure. And I feel like that's not been appreciated enough by the outside. And I think they'll get it at some point. But the more decentralized and I think that like a decentralized AI is one of the biggest wins for Ethereum. Like we need decentralized infrastructure. We need decentralized tokens. Like we need an ability to have an economy built in a decentralized way. And kind of crypto is critical for that. And I know that most people assume like when they hear crypto, they're just like either like monkey JPEG scammers or just like, a bunch of tech bros like gambling on, worthless things and playing gambling games. But reality is like beyond that, kind of the technology underlying these decentralized infrastructures, like we need market making mechanisms, we need the currency, like we need what functionality you can have on Ethereum in order to power ultimately the infrastructure that we're going to need to like break away and actually do something meaningfully different versus kind of what's come before. If we don't have a decentralized backbone with a token, that is ETH at the moment, like we can't have a decentralized compute market
Mm.
for AI. Like we can't have nice things.
And this is why we can't have nice things.
Yeah.
Yeah, so all right, continuing on with the idea of Ethereum, the Pectra update just went in. I'd love to hear your take on that. You're somebody who has worked with smart contracts, even, launched one with Transient Labs, the Doppelganger contract, which is super cool, and basically puts multiple artworks to one token. That's like a very simplistic way to
Yeah.
describe it, but I'd love to hear like what does the Pectra update kind of mean for you in your work as you go forward, creating art on the Ethereum blockchain.
No, I appreciate that. I think that, like I think like we talked about, I think the most important thing is that we just need an efficient decentralized structure to support so many of the technological like innovations that we need to kind of break free from a lot of centralized gatekeeping structures that like ultimately make our lives a lot worse. And the Pectra upgrade, I think, is a really important like step in that direction. And I'm really happy to see it because I know that like ETH kind of has wobbled a little bit in kind of figuring out exactly why they exist and what they're doing. But I
Yeah.
think with the Pectra upgrade, it streamlines a lot of the pain points. It streamlines a lot of the issues that just make adopting this broadly as an efficient network an issue. So bundling the transactions, I think, is critical.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, like it lowers the barriers to entry, and it lowers a lot of the barriers towards being able to transact efficiently on the L1, which I think is critical to scaling this because if it goes well, like we'll just need this thing at a scale that is of much, much greater magnitude than is currently possible. And this is a really good step in the right direction. And I think that's why you've seen such a good reaction to it. I think that the team like figured it out for this one. Like it's just an important step forward. And again, like I want to fight against AWS. Like I want our stuff to be on our systems. You know, again, like for everything from surveillance to the ability to just have efficient applications and efficient models for our own sake. It just has to be in our hands. And it's a critical, like it's a step on the way toward achieving like that critical tech level that we're actually able to do it.
I think the fact that we have our own currency, and by that I mean like literally thousands of options, like outside of fiat, that has always been one of the most incredible points for me of crypto, because there are so many, revolutions that have happened throughout history, and none of them had their own currency. And so I think that really allows for a freedom and a flexibility that we've never really seen before. Oh, and it's like you said, like it's the currency, it's the infrastructure and the ownership of these things that have value. This kind of sounds like a Karl Marx dream. Like the means of production, I mean, we're going to own like everything. The thing, the production, and how you transact. I mean, that's super powerful. The other thing I'm really excited about for the upgrade is the fact that wallets will now have smart contract capabilities. I immediately thought of you and several other artists. Is there anything brewing in your mind? Anything crazy or weird with this new feature that you're thinking about?
No, there's so many more options that you have right now. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, definitely have some ideas. But I mean, I feel like it just all comes down to, I don't know, for me, just like I feel like everything in our art space only really matters based on kind of what we're doing differently from what kind of came before, right? Like I feel like if we're just regurgitating kind of the past world, like we're kind of ultimately irrelevant with a bunch of artists
Mm.
who couldn't quite cut it in the gallery world. So like cool, like that's not really a strong movement. I think where we actually become important is where we look at how much more inclusive the digital art space is for people like the Osanachis, like the IHLs, like the people from places around the world that wouldn't have been able to meaningfully participate in the art world within our career to like make money with our work. And because we've been able to spread this out globally, and because we've been able to offer so many other people access in a relatively flat world to be able to participate, I think that's really what's special about this, and like being able to pull all of those stories together into relatively decent meritocracy. I just think is fascinating. And again, like I think that in the face of kind of this rapid homogenization of culture, which is driven largely by the media, it feels really really important to be able to pull in such a diversity of voices and a diversity of backgrounds and a diversity of artists into a space to all kind of share our art, share what we're working on, share the stories, and have it all seen and be seen. I think that's really what makes this special. I think this is really what makes this a bit of a revolution kind of in, you know, kind of the trajectory of our history. Or we can just, like, or we can pick a handful of, you know, white dudes and buy their work and ignore everybody else. And, it's all kind of meaningless.
Right.
Art historically irrelevant, right? Like, so I feel like there's a lot of potential here, but like with ETH, like with art, I feel like everything meaningful comes from the ability to include people at scale and to lower the barriers to entry so we can include so many more people that otherwise wouldn't be able to participate in this. If you talk about like technology that improves the world, it's like how do you get AI into the hands of everybody as a tool? How do you get art into the hands of everybody as a tool? How do you get people to be able to meaningfully communicate with each other, like, free of surveillance, free with privacy? How do you give people freedoms that they otherwise wouldn't have? And I feel like this technology empowers a lot of that. And I don't think we've seen much, if any, of the real infrastructure get built yet that we'll see get built over the next decade. And I think that, optimistically, with upgrades like Pectra, I think that we'll see the ability to actually create meaningful applications that, exist on the L1 or exist, on a reliable L2 that can power a lot of this, censorship free, government surveillance resistant, cross cultural dialogue.
Mm.
So I don't think that's just really important. And I think that the tech and the AI and the artists all kind of have to work hand in hand on this. But that's what's most interesting.
Yeah, bring on the Renaissance. It's time to do the science and the technology and the art all together.
Exactly.
They work best when they are happening together, right? Because it's like you said, like I think that like some of your pieces of art have been able to spark conversation in ways that like politicians can't, like that the news people can't. And it's fascinating that art could have such a huge impact on conversations when, you know, I think there's some people who want to kind of make it seem like, oh, well, it's just, you know, us sharing our feelings on our own time. Like, yes, but often my feelings could be indicative of a larger movement. And thank goodness there are certain people who have the visual, you know, literacy or the poetic literacy, whatever it is, to share this with people, to give them the words that maybe they can't find themselves. Like that is really the power of art, right? Is like to empower
Absolutely.
people.
No, absolutely. And you made the point, like medium agnostic too. I think it's just a matter of like having an art and being able to distribute it digitally, you know, in a manner that is like unchecked by, you know, censorship or surveillance.
Goat Network is the first sustainable BTC yield chain, powered by decentralized sequencers using multi-coin POS. Goat's mission is to transform BTC and Doge from passive holdings into active, yield-generating assets through a one-of-a-kind economic model that tokenizes sequencer revenues, unlocking the full potential of BTC-Fi and meme-Fi in a way that's never been done before, and creating new yield opportunities for Bitcoin and Dogecoin holders. Supply BTC or Doge, earn BTC in perpetuity. Get started through our user rewards onboarding portal, onepiece.goat.network.
Well, I wanted to switch gears a little bit because, you know, you mentioned leading up to this conversation that you are working on some counter AI surveillance technology. You've developed it. You're launching this startup very soon. I'd love to hear more about, you know, what this is. Obviously, you're passionate about surveillance and
Yeah.
AI, so it seems like a perfect, you know, apex of several of your interests and skills. So yeah, can you tell us more about it?
Yeah, thanks so much. Yeah, no, I'll be announcing it publicly probably in June.
So soon.
Yeah, it's I mean it's going full steam right now. You know, I had a conversation with an amazing artist, Casey Wong. He lives in Taiwan now, but he's a Hong Kong artist, and he's in the front lines of all of the protests in this recent round.
Wow.
And you know, being on the front lines of those protests, like they called them swimmers. The police would kidnap people who were protesting, strip them naked, then throw them off the bridge to Hong Kong, and they'd wash up on the shore naked. There's a whole history of
My
violence against
God.
protesters that the Western media just, you know, found unpalatable. So the people that protested there really put their lives on the line, you know, for the sake of democracy, for the sake of freedom of speech, knowing that you are not going to resist the CCP, like knowing they have a lot more people and a willingness to inflict, you know, death upon their enemies. So just a ton of respect for him. But, you know, through conversation that we were having, he was just saying like, hey, look, like, you know, you wear a wide brimmed hat when you're in Hong Kong because they have technology that can identify you based on your ears, you
Your
know,
ears.
your
Oh my
ears. Yeah, your
God.
ears are identifiers. They can identify you by your gait. You know, it's not just facial recognition. So
Wow.
thinking about that and thinking about, you know, kind of the other side of the emergence of AI and kind of what's possible with that, it just got me thinking like how to create something that helps people resist surveillance. Yeah, I've built a system that helps people evade AI surveillance, and I've gone through the whole patent process and everything else, and I'm excited to like be releasing it. I just think that we need more tools from the people while the people have the capacity to build the tools to resist a lot of the intrusions, you know, on our privacy, on our security, on our safety by these governments. You know, like you should be able to protest in New York freely and not be concerned about retribution down the road because you were flagged and you were added to a list.
Right.
I think democracy dies when people aren't able to freely express their opinions and freely protest, regardless of what side you're on. You know, we just need to be able to have dialogue and discourse freely and without retribution. Otherwise, you go down a really dark path. And you know, we've seen that in a number of places. Like, nothing's given to us, and I feel like we take a lot of these things for granted. So yeah, so I built a company.
Yes, you did. Which it's so wonderful that like off of the heels of several years of you like really taking a stand in so many different contexts, both when it comes to, wanting to protect free speech, talking about, protesters' rights, artists' rights, and even like back when you backed out of the Sotheby's glitch art sale because you were like, hi, dudes aren't the only ones who make this type of art. Like in some ways it feels like what you're protecting is so basic, and it's on one hand sad to see that, but then on the other hand like makes me very happy to be like, okay, these are conversations that need to be had and someone is doing it. And so for that to now, that energy to turn into this like anti-surveillance tool, I think it's really like you're not just starting the conversation, you're also like adding things to it that people can like be aware and then do something about it. Because I think something that's impossible to do right now, unless you go 100% off grid, is to, get your data off of the social media platforms. And it makes me sad that there's so many young people that are like, I don't care if TikTok has my data. I just want to look
Mm-hmm.
at cat videos. Like, I don't care if Facebook knows everything about me from the time I was 12. I just want to talk to my family in Mexico. Whatever it is, I think there's a lot of resistance in our bigger culture about digital privacy. Like, do you have any thoughts on like why that is and how we can combat it?
Yeah, I think it's just education. I think a lot of people don't consider the consequences of a lack of privacy. I think a lot of people, and who knows, like maybe with these roundups and these deportations, people start strongly thinking about like privacy mattering, because it may not matter to you, it may not matter to me, but if our lack of care about privacy puts our neighbor at risk, because privacy can't just be for the people that need it, right? I know there's that kind of the
Right.
pernicious idea, like if you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear.
Right, exactly.
If we don't preserve privacy as a basic right, then a lot of people that really need privacy are going to be at heightened risk. So, having good privacy practices and appreciating the need for privacy, maybe not something that you need personally, but your neighbor does, some people that do. And the more people that just punt on privacy and say, I don't care, I'm just going to watch the cat videos, they inadvertently put a lot of people in harm's way. They have families, like they have lives. I mean, like you're meaningfully hurting a lot of people by not appreciating the need for privacy. And I think that will only increase. I think the severity of our choices to limit our privacy will only hurt more and more people moving forwards. Again, I think it's like you said, like it's an important thing to have a discussion about. It's an important thing to just kind of talk about, because I think a lot of people don't know. A lot of people don't know to care about it. Um, and I just think, again, like we just need to have more conversations. You need to have more anecdotes about why it matters. A story about this, like, friend texted me the other day, is like a British guy walked by a CCTV in London, covered his face just because, hey, he didn't want to be
Just
perceived
cuz.
that day or whatever. And the police showed up at his house 3 hours later. Like, why did you do that?
Wow.
Like
Don't look at
if
my ears.
yeah, if we want to invite a surveillance state into every aspect of our lives, by all means. But I think one thing we've seen recently is how capriciously the law is applied, right? Hassan Piker,
Mhm.
who's a comedian and a left-wing person, was just held up at the border for hours just this week because he's a dissident. And they
Mhm.
basically held him for hours trying to get something they could use to justify him holding him further. Well, if you don't have any privacy and all of this is free, and there isn't really a strong rule of law, it's not particularly hard to find something that you've done wrong. It's like you're on the highway. If the police want to pull you over, they're going to find some infraction that lets them pull you over,
Right.
right? And that's why privacy is critical, because if we don't have privacy, it's very easy to find some infraction that you can use to then target your enemies.
Absolutely. And
And that's a real concern.
if that concern isn't big enough, I mean, I sometimes feel like I'm in a Black Mirror episode when it comes to how like the social media algorithms might like predict, content to put in front of me, or, putting these other opinions and advice sort of in my life. Like I've noticed it in very weird ways. And so I think like whether you're even if you're someone who feels like, oh, well, I have nothing to hide, well, why would you want to be someone who's like easily manipulated because they know you better than you do? Like that also kind of, it feeds into everything we've been talking about as well, about like the inability for us to have conversations, the echo chambers that we live in. It may seem like a slow progression and it's not that big of a deal, but we're seeing the effects of it right now, where we can't, I mean, how are we going to have elections? How are we going to have discussions? How are we going to regulate things when we can't even like agree on what we're talking about, agree on the facts that are supporting what we're talking about, right? And that all goes into this surveillance online, on one end, and then the fears of being picked up or picked on for any reason that you can't even foresee, so it's a big gamut.
Yeah, no, and you're exactly right. I mean, like, why does the data have any value to begin with? Right? The data has value because they can either predict your behavior or they can affect your behavior with it.
Exactly.
Is that really what you want out there? And again, we're coming up with AI. Like, AI just makes it all worse. And like, if I'm giving somebody the ability to predict or influence my behavior and they can then amplify their ability to do that with AI, it's not like we're not the most complicated things in the world. Like, we're just biological machines. Like, it's not,
Yeah, the human
it's not
psyche can be
the hardest thing in the
summarized.
world. So we're just outsourcing a lot of our autonomy by giving up our data. Like, we're giving up our ability to like have our own thoughts, make our own way, make our own decisions. Like, we're constantly influenced on kind of like micro and macro levels into behaviors that are beneficial to the people paying to influence the behaviors. And at a certain point, you have to like kind of question like what makes you human. And as we kind of advance into like a more extreme version of this, I think it just becomes like even more kind of a pressing question, especially kind of pairing that with outsourcing critical thought to AI. Like, it's going to
Yes.
be, again, the anti AWS argument, right? Like, if you're asking for advice on your, your relationship, you're asking for advice on your job, you're asking for advice on your diet, and then you're filtering that through an AI system run by a centralized entity that has a very strong incentive to sell you products. Well, guess what the quality of information is going to look like on the back end? Like, your critical
Mm-hmm.
thoughts are going to be consistently driven towards beneficial outcomes for the people in control of these lines. So yeah, no, I think it's just an incredibly concerning situation if we don't figure out how to like decentralize, keep compute out of the hands of the AWSs of the world, and kind of maintain our autonomy. We're going to have a huge fight for our own like sovereignty over the next decade, and I don't think a lot of people are ready for it. And my concern is that without the right amount of discussion, dialogue, and debate around all of this, that we probably won't recognize it until it's too late.
Yeah, and Black Mirror is a popular show for a reason.
Yeah.
And the like. Um, yeah, well, I could talk to you all day about all of this, but I think this is an awesome place for people to start and to learn more about, why privacy matters, how we can fight for surveillance. I'm really excited about your company going live next month,
Thank you.
and we'll definitely be ready to follow up. Are there any other, art drops or anything else you want to share with our audience?
Yeah, there's, I guess, this one fun thing. I built an app that hides data inside of the PNG structure.
Oh, the VeilPNG, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, so I actually built it to help people in Hong Kong communicate securely with each other because everything's monitored and censored.
Right.
So yeah, you can hide files inside of the PNG structure in a secure way, and you can basically share photos back and forth. The photos all have either more photos or messages or kind of whatever you want hidden inside of it. And yeah, so I have a release later this month that should antagonize a lot of people, which seems to be a reliable way to get people talking about things.
Yeah, and
Um,
you're very good at.
yeah, thanks. Yeah, but the idea is like, like we should be able to communicate securely. Like, we should be able to have discussions that are privy to only us. Like, we shouldn't have to include everybody else in the government apparatus into a conversation that we want to have. Like, I think it's a critical element. I think we just need more infrastructure built to support that. Signal and Telegram aren't it.
It ain't
So
it. That
yeah.
much is clear. Well, awesome. Wow. Well, I think you're like fully a hacker in my mind now. Hacker first, artist second. It used to be the reverse, but this is really
No,
amazing.
no, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. You can find Amadon everywhere, cool things are shared and talked about, yeah, follow him on Twitter and definitely keep an eye out for these cool things coming out in June.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure chatting with you always.
Likewise. All right, until next time.